Tensions in West Asia continue to escalate as Israel intensified its attacks against Hezbollah. Multiple locations in the southern suburbs of Beirut came under attack. This comes as the Hezbollah chief stated that ceasefire talks were possible if Israel stops attacking Lebanon. Meanwhile, Iran has called on Trump to review the U.S. government's approach in the region, saying that the election result is a chance to review the wrong approaches of the past. The Israeli army has released footage, meanwhile, showing its ground offensive in Lebanon. In the footage, soldiers and tanks were seen operating in an urban area reduced to rubble. Lebanon's health ministry has reported that 40 people were killed, 53 injured in an Israeli aerial bombardment of areas in eastern Lebanon's Bekaa Valley and Baalbek city early on Thursday. And following Israeli strikes overnight, areas of Beirut's southern suburbs were seen piled with rubble around severely damaged buildings. The area was hit by 2 strikes, one on Wednesday night and another early Thursday, after the military ordered residents to evacuate several locations. An Israeli strike also hit the Jamhur in the Babda district of Lebanon. According to the Lebanese health ministry, the death toll from the Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon since the beginning of the Israel-Hezbollah conflict in last October has crossed 3,000, with injuries rising to more than 13,600. Meanwhile, Hezbollah fired missiles at an Israeli military base near the airport. Israeli media reported a rocket had landed near the airport. In a televised address, Naim Qassem said there could be a road to indirect negotiations through the Lebanese state if Israel stops its aggression. But the Hezbollah leader also said that he does not believe that political action would bring an end to the hostilities. He said only developments on the battlefield and not political moves would actually bring an end to the hostilities between the group and the Israeli military.
عندما يقرر العدو
When the enemy decides to stop the aggression, there will be a path to negotiations that we have defined clearly. Indirect negotiations through the Lebanese state and President Nabi Berri, who holds the banner of the political resistance, which leads to Lebanon's stature and the end of the aggression.
الذي يحمل راية المقاومة السياسية.
And the Hezbollah chief further stated that they will continue to fight, and a win for either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the U.S. election did not make a difference to them. Remember, U.S. diplomatic efforts to halt the war between Israel and Hezbollah, including a 60-day ceasefire proposal, faltered last week ahead of the election. And there's also anger in Israel over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's surprise decision to replace the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Thousands of protesters gathered outside the Israeli parliament, calling on Netanyahu to step down and chanting shame. Some said, in fact, that they will stay outside the parliament until the Prime Minister leaves. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Ministry said on Thursday that it had signed an agreement to acquire 25 next-generation F-15 fighter jets from Boeing Company. The delivery of the new fighter aircraft will begin in 2031, with 4 to 6 aircraft to be supplied annually. Meanwhile, after Trump won the presidency on Wednesday, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson in fact said that the U.S. elections are an opportunity to review the wrong approaches of the American government in West Asia. He said the U.S. approach in the past has led to bitter experiences during his first term as president. Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, remember, also known as the Iran nuclear deal, which had ended 12 years of deadlock over Tehran's nuclear program. And our correspondent Jody Cohen sent us this report earlier, telling us how Israel and Netanyahu have reacted to Donald Trump's U.S. presidential win and whether this will affect the course of the war.
In a new Channel 12 poll, it showed that 67% of Israelis are satisfied with Trump winning, 18% are unhappy, and 15% weren't sure. Now, families of the 7 American Israeli hostages have called on President Trump to work with the Biden administration to secure the release of their loved ones. And remember, Trump said that he wants to see all American hostages freed or their captors would pay a big price. Now, in Trump's acceptance speech, he said that he's going to stop the wars. Commentators suggest that we could see the Gaza war ending potentially by inauguration, and then to see Trump focusing on expanding the Abraham Accords, potentially to include Saudi Arabia. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu was one of the first world leaders to speak with President Trump after his win. They had a warm conversation. Reportedly, it lasted roughly 20 minutes, and the two leaders agreed to work together for Israel's security and also discuss the Iranian threat.
And with us on the broadcast this minute is Mike Wickenheim, senior U.S. correspondent at the Israel-based I-24 News TV network, joining us live on the broadcast. If I can begin by asking you, Mike, to give us a better sense of what's going on the ground right now.
Well, it's tough to even imagine where to start here in Washington in terms of what's happening on the ground. Just a seismic shift in the way Election Day played out. I think everybody here was prepared for this to drag on for a while, for the votes to still be counted Thursday, Friday, provisional ballots, absentee ballots. I mean, the pollsters all had this as a statistical tie in the major battleground states. I don't think anybody was expecting this to essentially be decided on election night itself at 2 or 3 in the morning. So I think everybody now is adjusting to the new reality and trying to get a jump on what they're going to do going forward here. For Democrats, it's a complete deflation, essentially, of their hopes. Kamala Harris did not concede on election night itself. She gave a pretty tempered speech at her election headquarters yesterday. Joe Biden to address the nation, and the plan is to invite Donald Trump to the White House for sort of a proper reintroduction to the White House again. But the Democrats trying to figure out exactly how this blow came about, losing immense ground to black voters, to Latino voters, to other voters of color, to young voters, all of these bases that have been their bastion for so long, evaporating in one election cycle. It's a tough situation for Democrats now to try to decipher how things went so wrong so quickly and where to go from here. Meanwhile, Republicans now in full speed ahead mode in transition to stock the White House with their preferred appointees. Recall the last time was Donald Trump's first introduction to government. He's taking advice from a lot of different people 8 years ago as to how to build his government, how to build his administration. Now, he knows the lay of the land. He knows his people. He knows his policies. He knows what he wants to put into place. And more importantly than that, as opposed to his last term, he knows how to get it done, more familiar with how the levers of government work or are supposed to work. That's certainly going to influence how he goes about stacking his administration, putting together his cabinet, and that's what he's doing at the time here, sorting out who gets what position, who gets what portfolio, and to lay out a policy agenda probably for the first 100 days, right, and so on. Don't forget as well, the House of Representatives is still up in the air, and that could be a major factor in how much power President Trump has in his next term.
Right. Speaking of which, he has categorically said that he's not going to start a war. He's going to stop the wars. What is your assessment of the kind of policies or the kind of approach that Trump would adopt in comparison to what happened during the Biden administration? The question on everyone's mind really is, how will Trump stop the wars? What does Trump have that Biden did not?
A projection of strength. Biden is a diplomat by nature. He sat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for many years. He sat under President Obama as vice president. His policy, his vision was always one of diplomacy, not only first, but second, third, and fourth, and keep going down the line. Never give up on diplomacy. It is the way forward. It's the way a multilateral world is supposed to work. As we see the world burning right now in many places, it just doesn't work that way. It's a policy in many instances that is of a bygone era. And I think what Trump brings to that Biden doesn't, for better or worse, it's not a judgment, it's an assessment. For better or worse, he brings a sense of unpredictability, of a sense of erraticness to the world stage, and basically laying out there, hey, we'll try to talk a little bit, but there's a red line now. I'm not going to tell you what my red line is. I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to hit it, but it's there. Don't cross it. Just make sure you don't cross. And that is a big, big difference between the approaches of President Biden and President-elect Trump. That's what he brings, that sense to his enemies that at any point, if they cross whatever line he's set out or whatever line he's imagined in his head, that there's going to be major consequences. And that has the tendency to kind of settle things down a little bit, to make people think twice about what they're doing. And I think that had a major role in why there were so few conflicts that America was tied down to during Trump's first term.
Sure. Let's just look at the other side for now. You know, there has been that talk about how Netanyahu has not really done what America would like him to. Or, you know, there have been several instances where, in a way, Netanyahu has stood his ground in spite of American pressure. So do you really see that equation changing with Trump in the White House and the kind of reciprocation perhaps that comes in from Netanyahu now?
You know, that's going to be a humongous question going forward, because in the first term, Israel was essentially getting 95% of what it was asking from President Trump, and really having to give very little in return. The moving of the embassy, the recognition of sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the Abraham Accords. I mean, these were things that Netanyahu had to give very, very few concessions on in order to acquire. When Trump goes out and says, as has been reported, that he told Netanyahu, I want the war against Hamas wrapped up by the time I take office, well, that's just not a signal to lay down the guns. It doesn't work that way. That is a signal that Netanyahu is going to have to find a way to end the war under some sort of favorable terms. He needs to save face. He can't just say, well, now that it's January 20th, we've accomplished all our aims. The public doesn't buy that. He's going to have to figure out how to get the hostages out, how to make sure that Israel is able to still safeguard the areas around Gaza, make sure that Hamas is done once and for all. There's still pockets of the terror group that are operating successfully in Gaza. And in order to do that, because he hasn't been able to do it yet, obviously, he's going to have to give. He's going to have to give concessions. And so this, I think, will be one of the few times where Trump, in his relationship with Netanyahu, is asking him to give something major up, to offer something major in return for American support. That's a big difference. And Netanyahu, he still has his right-wing government to contend with. He still has those same ministers breathing down his throat in terms of security issues, in terms of pushing back on pressure on the U.S. So he still has those things to balance out here. But now he can't say no the way he said no to President Biden. I think President Trump is not going to put up with it to the extent that Biden has.
Interesting. We're leaving it there for the moment. Mike, thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast. To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.